GTA, because of the cost of construction and higher interest rates. So a year, 2 years from now, when we need those units, they will not be there. So that will put some pressure on prices, rent inflation will rise, and I'm very concerned about it, but that's the reality. And when it comes to investors, I totally agree that at least in the next year, you will see many investors that were already in negative cash flow before the crisis will be in an even deeper negative cash flow, which will impact demand and supply.
And with the rapidly increasing rates, now we're hearing that the Bank of Canada isn't done yet, and there may be another rate increase in December. How will that further impact affordability?
Absolutely. Interest rates will be rising. The question is by how much. And the Bank of Canada was given, as you all know, a green light to go 75 basis points 2 weeks ago. They went 50. That took a lot of guts, because I believe that every economic recession was helped, if not caused, by monetary policy error in which central bankers raised interest rates way too much and killed the economy. You don't know that you overshoot until it happens. The reason why it's happening, and that's the risk that we're all facing, is that inflation is a lagging indicator. Inflation is telling you about the past, not the future. Inflation peaked on average 6 months after the beginning of its recession. So inflation is like this brown spot on the banana. By the time you see it, it's way too late. But show me the central banker that will stop raising interest rates while inflation is still elevated. And that's more or less where we are. So we are getting very close to overshooting because we don't know where inflation will peak. And that's why inflation is so important, supply chain is so important, and I think you'll be talking about it.
And David, we've just talked about rents increasing, interest rates increasing, but inflation's not decreasing. What are the macro implications on the economy of this type of situation, and are we facing a recession?
Well, the fact of the matter is that inflation has already peaked. Peaked at obviously a 40-year high, but it's starting to come down. And it doesn't come crashing down. Inflation doesn't come crashing down. Inflation is like a race between watching paint dry and grass grow. But it is actually moderating, and I think in the next year it's going to be quite a bit lower. Will it be as low as central banks want it to be? That's hard to say. I think that these central banks all have egg in their face because they talked about transitory, never defined transitory. Paul Volcker didn't wait for inflation to get to 2% back in the early 80s. By the time he started cutting interest rates, inflation, was still close to double digits. I think that, back to Ben's point, monetary policy hits the economy with lags. This has been the most vicious monetary shock. What are we talking about? 350 basis points off the lows. The most intense interest rate shock since the John Crow period. Before that, back in the early 80s. And when you're looking historically at, because interest rates, what else matters? We're talking to a real estate group. It's like Albert Einstein was the best economist that ever lived, even though he won his Nobel Prize for physics, and he famously said that the power of compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it receives it, and he who doesn't ends up paying for it. This is a very pernicious interest rate cycle, and the odds that we go into recession for next year, if we're all playing the probabilities, is 90%. There's no such thing as a sure thing. And the one point I just want to make is this. We have not gotten into an interest rate cycle like this with house prices in such a bubble and household balance sheets in such a bubble. This is a bigger bubble on household debt in Canada by any measure, and a bigger bubble in residential real estate than in the US in the mid-2000s, when I was pounding my fist on the table talking about a housing bubble, and my nickname was the skunk at the picnic. Who wants to have lunch with a skunk? Nobody. But here's what I'll say is that, people say to me, well, but the bank rate is only 3.75%. Well, it's not about the level, it's about the change. But at that level, because I said the level of debt and the principal that people have to pay along with the interest, when you're taking a look right now at what people are paying in aggregate, 14% of their after-tax income is going to service their overall debt. By the way, it's not just mortgage debt, it's also consumer debt. 14%. It doesn't get higher than that. And it's actually the same level. What Canadians are paying out of their pocket on debt service in aggregate is the same today as it was back in 1990. I think back in 1990, by the way, we had a recession. 1990, interest rates were 12.5%. So right now, this 3.75% interest rate, or this, call it 5-6% mortgage rate, in terms of what it means for Canadian households, is what 12% felt like back 30 years ago. And the bank's not stopping, for what you said. They're focused looking at, well, on the brown spot on the banana. These central banks are looking in the rearview mirror, and we're going to pay a price for it. And I understand, you know, we get data. People say the data are looking just fine. It's like people telling me in 2007 the data are looking just fine, but there's lags. 2008 didn't look so good. And 2023 is going to look a lot like 2008 did. It's not going to be a run on the banks, okay? Not that I want to own the banks in my portfolio, but I will say that a recession is staring us in the face. 90% odds you don't want to dismiss out of hand.
Let me just say a few things here. First, I totally agree. What's impacting your market is the increased sensitivity to higher interest rates because of leverage. Even more than the US, the tiny Bank of Canada is more powerful than the mighty Fed because in the US they have less debt because they went through the mother of all recessions and deleveraging in 2008. So in many cases, higher interest rates are really significant and the impact is asymmetrical, more significant than lower interest rates. So the way I see it is low interest rates is like, you know, we have a generation of Canadians that never experienced higher or even rising interest rates. For them, those extremely low interest rates, was the norm. It's like low interest rates, it's like being in a relationship. In the first few weeks, you're so excited you cannot breathe. But if after 5 years you cannot breathe, you have asthma. What I'm telling you is that monetary policy is asymmetrical and the increase in interest rates is even more significant in Canada, so Dave is totally right that we are facing the impact of this increased sensitivity due to higher debt. And that's maybe a reset, which is a good thing, but it's painful. Let's talk about the recession 1 second. Not all recessions were created equal. The question is what kind of a recession we are going to have. One thing that is very different at this point, so far, is the labor market. Every first Friday of the month, we get the employment numbers from Stats Canada, 8:30 in the morning. So at 8:29 in the morning, every economist is sitting in front of his air computer, looking, waiting, anticipating the numbers. Believe me, it's very exciting. And every time that we look at the numbers, we look at 1 million vacancies in the labor market. I'm hearing that businesses have to pay people to show up for an interview. Yes. We have never seen anything like that. So the hope and the prayer, and that's not guaranteed, is that over the next year, with this recession, the economy will be shedding vacancies as opposed to jobs. And the increase in the unemployment rate, it will rise, but it will not go back to something crazy. That's the only hope that will distinguish between a wannabe recession, basically a recession without a major pain in the labor market, and a real recession. And it's 50-50. Let's face it. A little bit of overshooting by the Bank of Canada that can happen, maybe they are already overshooting, can lead you to a real recession, and that's more or less where we are.
And so my next question is going to be for the two realtors. With 5 to 6% interest rates being pretty normal, I mean, we've seen these before. It's not the first time we've had these. The threat of a looming recession, is this something that keeps buyers and sellers up at night? And what about first-time buyers? We'll start with Melanie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been